Welcome back. So, we've spent a lot of time talking about the basic user interface of Microsoft Excel. And you might have seen that up until this point we haven't done a lot of typing inside of the actual spreadsheet. Well, that stops now. What I'd like to do is focus a little bit more so on actually putting this content inside the spreadsheet. Let's say that we've decided to strike it out on our own. We're going to be opening up an artisanal coffee shop. I live here in San Francisco, and if there's one thing this city totally needs another one of, it's an artisanal coffee shop. We'll go ahead and start with the actual name of our business. I'm here in cell A1, and I'd like to just put the name of the business in here. Now, I can't think of a better artisanal coffee shop name than the one on the tip of my tongue here, Birch & Sons. Actually, it's 2015. Birch & Daughters. There we go. So I've got my Birch & Daughters coffee shop. Now, when I finished typing, I tapped the Enter key, and you might have seen that my cell jumps down to A2. The reason being is that the Enter key is actually the equivalent of a down arrow key, especially when you're inside of a cell. Now with that being said, you can also go to the right instead by tapping the Tab key. So by tapping the Tab key, you can finish typing content inside of a cell and go one cell to the right, or again, the Enter key to go down. Now within that, you can also go one cell up by pressing and holding the Shift and then tapping the Enter key. So if the Tab key pushes us off to the right and the Enter key pushes us down, but the Shift Enter key brings us back up, what do you think Shift Tab will do? Well, if you said it's going to bring us to the left, you'd be absolutely right. So once again, the Enter key brings us down a cell, the Tab key brings us to the right, the Shift Tab key brings us back to the left, and the Shift Enter key brings us one cell up. Now let's say that I'm not done with this name here. I'd say that Birch & Daughters isn't the full name. Maybe I'd like to add the word coffee shop to that. If you saw the name Birch & Daughters, you might be curious as to what kind of business that would be too. So if I'd like to add new content into the cell without double clicking on it, or going up to the formula bar, both of which are things I could do, I'm going to simply tap the F2 key. And the F2 key is going to bring me back into that cell at the very end. You'll see that my cursor is now active, and I can go ahead and add the rest of my content. I'll go ahead and type space, coffee shop. Now, if I'm done typing inside of a cell, but I don't want it to drop down or go to the right or go up or to the left, I can press and hold the Control key and tap the Enter key, and it will keep my active cell inside the content without having to jump down or go to the right. So again, if you don't want your cursor to move, but you're done editing the cell, press and hold the Control key and tap the Enter key. Go ahead and pause the video and get to this point with me. Alright, so let's go ahead and expand on this menu a little bit more so. We need to know what kind of items we're going to be carrying here. So I'm going to go ahead and type items in cell A3. I'd like to drop down, so I'm going to tap my Enter key. And I definitely know that a coffee shop probably is going to carry coffee. Probably going to carry tea, and then maybe a couple of food items. We'll say bagels, crumpets. For all of my tea drinkers out there, I know you're about your crumpets. And additionally, I'd like to go ahead and enumerate the price here. So how much is our coffee going to cost? Well, this is an artisanal coffee shop, so we're probably talking, let's say $4. So I'm going to go ahead and type 4.00, and I'm going to hit Enter. Huh, where did my .00 go? Well, we'll talk about that in just a little bit, but I do want to point out that despite the fact that I did type 4.00, that went away. Let's talk about tea. How much is our tea going to cost? Let's go ahead and say $3.50. Once again, I'm going to go ahead and type 3.50, and I'm going to hit Enter, and now wait a minute. I definitely typed a 0 right after that 5. And I know I typed 2 zeros after that 4. So what's going on here? Well, the problem is Excel is trying to keep these cells as simple as possible. And one of the ways it does that is by removing zeros that might go on forever. For those of us that remember algebra, you might have been taught that every number has zeros after it. 4.0000000 is still just the number 4. And in fact, all numbers have that decimal-based valuing after it. In order to make sure that this is the simplest presentation of these numbers, Excel actually removes those zeros. To fix that, we have to change the number formatting. We actually have to tell Excel what kind of number this is. So there's a couple of different ways we can do that here. Now, I'm going to go ahead and select that 4, and I'm going to right-click on it. Now, where can I format the settings for this? There. Format cells. I'm going to go ahead and click on Format Cells, and it jumps me into the number formatting settings. So what kind of number is this going to be? Is this going to be a regular number? Maybe. Or is it going to be currency? Notice it actually affixes the dollar signs to it. This is exactly what I want, so I'm going to go ahead and apply my currency and click OK. Much better. Now I've got my .00 afterwards, but I still don't have it here. The reason being is that I only made that change to that one cell. We have a saying at Learn It, and it's that you've got to select to effect. If I want to make changes to a certain cell, I need to select it first. So I'm going to go ahead and select the 3 additional cells that I know I'm going to be typing dollar values into. And this time I'm going to show you an even faster way. I'm going to select those 3 cells, and inside the Home tab, I'd like to draw your attention to the number formatting command group here. Currently the formatting is set to General. So I'm going to go ahead and change that by clicking on the drop-down arrow and selecting the currency number formatting. And there we go. So I've now changed the way Excel presents this information. So I'll go ahead and fill out the rest of this here. We'll say the bagels are going to be $2.50 and the crumpets will be $2.75. Go ahead and take this opportunity to pause the video and catch up with me here. Once again, to change the number formatting, simply select a cell and right-click on it, and go to Format Cells, and choose the formatting category from there, or alternatively, select the cell and then using the number formatting command group, click from the drop-down and select from there as well. Go ahead and try that for yourselves. Alright, welcome back. So hopefully now you're all caught up with me here. We have our Birch & Daughters coffee shop and we're building a menu. Now, over the break, I ran this menu by a focus group. It was expensive, but it was totally worth it because we've seen that the focus group told us crumpets are definitely out. The average person doesn't go to a coffee shop to order crumpets. So I'd like to remove that item from the menu and replace it with something a little bit more modern. So in this instance here, I'm going to go ahead and remove the word crumpets from cell A7. There's a couple of different ways I can do that for you, and I'm going to run that back. The first way I can do it is simply by pressing the delete key. So I'm going to highlight A7 and press the delete key, and you'll see that it's deleted the entire value instantaneously. So that's one way to do it. I'm going to go ahead and undo that so I can show you another way. To undo, you can either use the undo button on the top left corner, or alternatively, you can press and hold the Control key and tap the letter Z. Either way will work. So once again, you can either press the backspace key or delete key to delete a value, or let's say that I just like to replace the value. Maybe crumpets aren't going to do so well, but biscuits, a more common iteration of crumpets, might be, or English muffins. Let's do English muffins. So to replace crumpets, I'm simply going to start typing. I've got A7 selected, and I'm just going to start typing there. English muffins. And once I'm done, I'd like to get out of the editing field here, but I don't want to leave the cell. To do that, I'm going to press and hold the Control key and tap the Enter key once again, and there you go. English muffins is now in the cell. Now, wait a minute here. Where's the word muffin? What's an English M? I don't know. What's happened here? Did I just lose all of my content? Well, the answer is complicated, but we'll break it down here. When we start to type anything inside of a cell, we're allotted a certain amount of space here. In this case here, you can see that the space between A and B is not that large. So you can see that English muffin didn't fit in all the way. But you might be saying to yourself, Sean, we typed Birch and Daughters in here and it seems to fit fine. Well, it kind of does. The reason being is that English M, or in this case English Muffins, is being cut off because cell B7 does have a value in it. Meanwhile, A1 is allowed to run on and on and on because there's no values in B1 or C1. If I typed anything inside of these cells right here, like the word hello, you'll see that Birch and Daughters Coffee Shop immediately got hidden because B1 takes precedence. However, if I delete the value, A1 is allowed to run itself over simply because there is no content it could possibly be impeding on. So how do we fix this? Well, we need to resize the column. The easiest way to do that is to find the border between A and B, or in between any column that has a value you'd like to adjust. And clicking and holding, I'm going to expand the value until Muffins fully fits in. Additionally, what I could have also done is find the border and double click. Now you'll notice it went a lot farther, and this is because of Birch and Daughters Coffee Shop field here. It auto-expanded to the widest value inside of that column. So depending on the way that you're trying to expand it, this might not necessarily be the way that you want. I think this is a little far personally. So I'm going to readjust so that it allows English Muffins to show without being too big. Of course, we can also do the same thing with row-based values. We can make row-based values wider as well, or more narrow. Once again, by finding the border between any two rows, you can double click and it will auto-fit based on the content of the cells in the rows. Go ahead and pause the video and try that for yourself. Alright, so we've had some opportunities to enter content and edit content if we need to. Now, let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about what we can do with this data once it's input. Now, I've gone ahead and I've added data for weeks 1 through 4 in terms of total unit sales for coffee, tea, bagels, and English muffins. So this is great. Our business is successful. We're making it. But we don't know exactly what's going on with all of this data. At this stage, all we know is how much we sold in any one week for any one of these particular items. There's not a lot of questions we can answer with this data just yet. For example, maybe I'd like to know the total amount of units I sold in week 1 completely. This might give me a better idea of how many customers I might have had, or how many individual transactions I might have had. So let's say I would like to calculate the total unit sales for week 1. Placing my cursor in cell C8 here, what I'd like to do is calculate all of the values directly above. Now, for those of you who have used Excel in the past, I'm sure you know the ability to type equals and add up all of these different values. But before we get to all of the hand typing, I'd like to show you some automated options that we have available to us. In particular, I'd like to introduce to you the AutoSum tool. So go ahead and let's place our cursor in cell C8, and I'm going to go ahead and just click the AutoSum button. When I do, it actually does exactly that. It auto-sums up the values directly above it. It's made a guess as far as what the values I'd like to add together are. In this case, it's identified cell C4, 5, 6, and 7 as those values. And it's saying, hey, do you want to sum those up? It's guessed right, so I'm just going to go ahead and tap the Enter key. And you can see that I sold in week 1, 1,625 units. Let's go ahead and do the same thing for weeks 2 through 4. Once again, I'm going to place my cursor in cell D8 and click the AutoSum tool. It's going to select all of the values that I think it's going to be adding together. But if I'd like to edit it, I can always just highlight the content myself. Now in this case it's right, but let's say it's wrong. Let's say it only guessed that one cell. I can click and drag and fix it. Now once I'm done here, I could tap the Enter key again, but I'd like to get just to the next cell to my right. Who remembers the key that I used to go one cell to the right? If you guessed the Tab key, you'd be absolutely right. I'm going to go ahead and tap the Tab key, and it's going to take me right over. You can see week 2 was definitely better than week 1. Go ahead and take this opportunity to apply AutoSum to weeks 3 and 4. Alright, so far we've calculated the total unit sales for weeks 1, 2, 3, and 4 using the AutoSum feature. What I'd like to do now is find out the total amount of coffee that I sold in this particular month. To do that, I'm going to place my cursor in cell G4, And in the same process here, what I could do is use the AutoSum feature, and the AutoSum feature prevents me from having to go through the tedious process of typing an equal sign, typing the word sum with an open parentheses, and then saying C4 plus D4 plus E4 plus. You can see how this is really tedious even just to watch me do that. So again, I'm going to go ahead and use the AutoSum tool. But this time, before I click enter, I'd like to point out that it's not perfect. Notice that it actually includes the pricing value in column B, which is not exactly what I wanted. In this case, I only want weeks 1 through 4. Or in this case, C through F. So I'm going to reselect from C4 to F4, and I'm going to be dropping down to the cell below, so I'm going to tap the enter key, and there you go. So go ahead and do that. AutoSum for all these individual values here. Once again, simply click the AutoSum tool and highlight the values that you would like summed together. Now lastly, what I'd like to do is get a total units sold overall. Now which one do I calculate? Do I calculate the values above or the values to my left? Well, the answer is the same, no matter which one you use, because this one is simply calculating individual weeks, whereas these values are calculating individual items. However, the total units sold will be the same regardless. So overall, we sold 6,879 units in a single month. That's not bad. Go ahead and pause the video and take this opportunity to catch up with me. Alright, welcome back. So we've calculated the total units sold per week and per item, and we were able to do that using automated features like the AutoSum tool. What we'd like to do now is focus a little bit more on the real world matters. We'd like to figure out, now that we've got our total units sold, how much did we make? Let's talk dollars for a moment here, ladies and gentlemen. Here in cell H4, I've got a column ready to calculate my subtotals. Now, how do I calculate how much money I actually made? Well, with this data here, I can simply take the total units sold and multiply it by how much each individual item costs. Now, of course, this is glazing over business costs, like how much it costs to get the raw materials and blah, blah, blah. But let's keep it simple. I'd like to just calculate how much income I made selling these items. Placing my cell in H4, what I'd like to do is calculate those values, units sold times price. So I'm going to actually need to write a formula this time. There's no automated tool for this. Now, in Excel, we need to wake it up. We need to tell it that it's going to be doing some math. The way we do that is with the universal sign equals. By typing the equal sign, we've indicated to Excel that it's about to do some math, and that it needs to wake up and start paying attention to the content coming afterwards. So now that I've typed H4, I'd like to go ahead and calculate total units sold times price. Now, I could type 3263 and then the multiplication sign using my Shift 8 key, and then typing 4, and it calculates it. In this case here, I made $13,052. But here's the problem. Let's say I raise the price. Let's say that this was incorrectly added, and the actual price of a cup of coffee is $3.95. Did my subtotal change? No, it's still $13,052. The reason being is that we told Excel what to do, not where to look. Remember when I showed you the formula bar? If I click inside this cell right here, I can see that the formula isn't looking at this cell right here to see if it's changed. It still says 4. So how do we fix that? How do we future-proof a formula to account for data changing? Well, first things first, let's go ahead and delete that value in cell H4. And I'm going to start over with my equal sign. And this time, instead of telling Excel that it's going to be multiplying 3,263 by $3.95, I'm simply going to tell Excel where to look to find those numbers. So in this case here, it's going to be G4, selected by clicking on it. You'll notice that it's got the dancing ants all around it. multiplied by B4. Once again, notice that it's got the little dancing ants around it. G4 times B4 inside of the cell where I'd like this answer to come out. And I'm going to lock it in by pressing and holding the control key and tapping enter. And there it is. So I made $12,888.85. And now, if I change my coffee price back to $4, voila, my subtotal also changes. So now I can update this data with the latest information, and I'm able to see those numbers reflected in any formulas that are referencing those cells. Go ahead and pause the video and try this out for yourself. Once again, in cell H4, what we simply did was multiplied total units sold by clicking on that cell, multiplying it by the price, once again by clicking on that cell and pressing enter to lock it in. Go ahead and try that. Alright, so now we've got the subtotals for all 4 items. And if I'd like to, I can actually even calculate the total dollar value of all the items together. Now we saw that we were able to do it with the auto sum feature. Let's talk a little bit about how they got that value and how we can build that function ourselves. To do that, what I'd like to do is build a sum function. Now just like with a formula, I'm going to start with my equal sign, but this time, instead of just jumping right into the math, I'm going to tell Excel exactly what I'd like it to do. And in this case, I'd like it to sum up the values. So I'm going to type the word sum, and a couple of things pop up here. We see a list of functions, like sum, SUMIF, and for every cell that's selected here, or every function rather, you'll see off to the right a description of what this function actually does. And in this case, the sum function adds all the numbers in a range of cells. If that's the function you'd like to use, and it is, we'd like to tell Excel this is the one. We do that by inserting an open parentheses after the function's name. So I've got equals sum, open parentheses. I can now select all the numbers I'd like added into my sum function. In this case here, I've got 13,000 through 1,927. I selected all 4 values by clicking and dragging. However, you can also click and hold the Shift key and tap the down arrow key until all the values are selected. Once that's in place, we'd like to tell Excel that this function is now complete. And the way we do that is by pressing and holding the Shift key and closing off these parentheses. Remember, every open parentheses requires a closed parentheses as well. Once this function is done, I'm going to tap the Enter key, and there you have it. Total, we made $24,038 in this particular month's worth of sales. Not bad. Maybe we'd also like to calculate the average number of units sold. So in this particular instance, maybe I'd like to find out the average number of coffee items sold. So let's go ahead and in cell C10 here, average units. I'd like to find out how much I sold in coffee, tea, bagels, and English muffins. Go ahead and resize here a little bit. So how do you calculate the average units sold for coffee? Well, just like we did with the sum function, we'd like to tell Excel to do a certain set of math. And the way we're going to do that is starting with the equal sign. So I've typed my equal sign, and this time, instead of typing sum, I'm going to go ahead and type average. Once I've done that, I'd like to tell Excel, yeah, this is the function I want to use, and I'm going to open up these parentheses. Now all I need to do is select the cells that I would like averaged together. In this case, I'm averaging coffee, so I'm going to select weeks 1 through 4 of coffee and close the parentheses. Tap enter to lock it in, and I can see that the average number of units of coffee sold in any one particular week is 815 units. And if I highlight this cell, I can see in the formula bar, there's that function that I built. Go ahead and pause the video and catch up to me here. Let's calculate the average units for all 4 items. Alright, welcome back. So at this stage, we've calculated the average unit sales of each individual item. We've calculated the total units sold of each individual item. And using that information, we were able to calculate the subtotal dollar value, the actual amount of money we earned selling these items. So let's keep on keeping on with some of this math. What we'd like to do now is maybe calculate the total amount of taxes that we're going to need to set aside for federal and state and local taxes. To do that, we're going to need the help of our tax rate field up here at the top. Now here in San Francisco, our tax rate is about 8.75%, so we'll be using that value. If you'd like to substitute it for your local sales tax rate, you're more than welcome to. Here in column I, I've got a taxes field. Now to calculate taxes, I'm simply going to multiply the total items, total dollar value made by the tax rate. So in this case of coffee, $13,052 multiplied by 8.75% to get the total amount of taxes I need to pull out. So let's go ahead and do that. Once again, to start any function or formula, I'm going to need to kick it off with an equal sign. And I'm going to go ahead and select cell H4 and multiply it by 8.75%. Enter to lock it in, and I can see that the total amount of taxes I need to set aside is $1,142. Now, once I've built a formula, I really don't necessarily want to have to build it all over again. That seems tedious, and it feels like a lot of work for a software program that's touted as being the end-all be-all of doing math for me. So we don't actually have to retype this formula all over again. We do have access to something called the autofill handle. The autofill handle allows us to copy the same formulas over and over and over again, adjusting for relative cell references. So for example here, let's say that I'd like to replicate this formula of G4 times B4 here in cell H4. I'm going to go ahead and clear these values out right here. And while in this cell right here, it does say G4 times B4, what I'd need in each individual cell is the respective row value. So instead of G4 times B4 here, in the cell below, I would need G5 times B5 and G6 times B6, and so on. So let's see what happens. To engage the autofill handle, I'm going to need to find the little green box in the bottom right corner of my active cell. Hovering over it, you'll see that my fat white cross turns into a thin black cross. Hovering over it, you'll see that once I've got that thin black cross, I'm going to click and hold and drag down to fill the respective cells that I'd like to copy. Notice that the green box is expanding, although no values have appeared yet. Once I release, notice all of the cells' values auto-populate. So it surely did. G5 times B5, G6 times B6, G7 times B7. Great. So let's go ahead and do the same thing with taxes. Once again, I'm going to hover over that little green box in the bottom right corner and click and drag and release. Whoa! That is not what you expected, is it? What went wrong? Well, a lot went wrong here. Let's go ahead and talk about it here. Now, here in cell I4, I see the formula is exactly what I built it out to be, H4 times H1, or the subtotal times the tax rate. Let's see what the cell below it says. H5, or the subtotal, times H2. H2 has nothing in it. Oh, I see. So just like in the formula before, when I autofilled down, G4 times B4 became G5 times B5, this formula's value also increased. When you autofill down row by row, the row value, in this case right here, 4 and 1, both increase by 1. This is called relative cell referencing. When you autofill down, it continues to reference those cells relatively based on the positioning of the cell formula. We do, however, have the ability to control that a little bit more so. By selecting the cell that we'd like to lock in, in this case here, what cell do we not want to change ever? H1. We don't want the tax rate to ever stop being H1. In fact, we want every single formula to reference their subtotal and then multiply it by H1. So to lock that in, we need to absolute reference this cell, meaning that we will always absolutely reference that one point in the spreadsheet. To do that, we're going to engage the F4 key. So by selecting H1, the cell I don't want to change, I'm going to tap my F4 key, and you'll see that now H1 is surrounded by dollar signs. Once you've done that, go ahead and lock it in by tapping the Enter key. And you'll see that the formula itself didn't change the result. It's still 1,142. But I fixed it, right? All the other cells should be good? Well, unfortunately not. Autofill is a one-time deal, meaning that if I go from cell to cell here, you'll see that they're still referencing H2, H3, and H4. If I would like to replicate this style of formatting to all the other cells, I'm going to need to autofill down again. So one last time, I'm going to select I4. Now, with an absolute referenced H1 cell, I'm going to autofill down. And there it is. So now, H4 times H1, and below that, H5 times the absolute referenced H1. The cell below it, H6 times the absolute referenced cell of H1. So when you're trying to build a function or formula that is going to consistently reference the exact same cell every single time, no matter what, no matter how many times you autofill or copy and paste, you need to remember to absolute reference that cell using the F4 key. Go ahead and pause the video and catch up with me here. Remember how we got there. To calculate the tax rate, we multiplied subtotal by the tax rate. However, to allow for us to absolute reference and autofill down, we remembered to lock in cell H1 in that function. Go ahead and take this opportunity to do just that. Welcome back. So now that we've got our basic menu up and running, let's take a deeper look. Things look alright. We've got our weeks 1 through 4 sales, we've got total units sold, and the cool part about this entire process is that it's automated, meaning that as soon as we update any of these sales values from weeks 1 through 4, our total units sold changes, our subtotal changes, our taxes change, our average units change, all because we told Excel how to do what we wanted it to do. Once we've gotten to this point here, maybe we'd like to expand. We're doing so well, we'd think we're going to add a new menu item. But there doesn't really seem to be anywhere for me to add that. We've got coffee, tea, bagels, English muffins. Maybe I'd like to add a third drink. That'd be kind of silly for me to toss it underneath the total here, so I actually need a little bit of room. In order to create this room, I'm going to insert a new row. To insert a new row, go ahead and place your cursor anywhere below where you'd like to have your row inserted. In this case, I'd like to have a new blank row 6. So I'm going to place my cursor in row 6. Having placed my cursor there, I'm going to navigate up to the Home tab and find that Insert button. Go ahead and find that Insert button and select the Insert Sheet Rows. And just like that, you've got a brand new clean row. Now, we could have also simply right-clicked on the row number 6 and selected Insert as well. Both will do exactly what you want it to do. Go ahead and try that for yourself and then come back. Alright, so we've got our new blank row. Our new coffee drink will be our new patent pending cough tea. All rights reserved. And our cough tea will be, I don't know, let's say $5. Go ahead and make up some sales figures here. It's super popular. And you'll notice that as we're going through this process here, all of our totals are updating as well. I'll explain why in just a moment. Now you'll notice that our totals down here at the bottom updated. However, our total units sold, subtotal, and taxes did not. The reason being is that when you insert a row where there's an existing range of summation, in this case we were already summing up these fields right here, when we inserted a row in the middle, we stretched out that range. So any formulas that we're referencing, say from C4 to C7, if we stretched that out, it would automatically grow to include that new C8. However, when we insert a new row, it does not copy formulas. So you'll notice that here in cell G5, we have a formula, H5, we have a formula, I5, we have a formula. Those will not copy when you insert rows, so it is important to keep that in mind. Fortunately, we have our autofill technique, or by highlighting both one row that does have the formula and one row that does not, using the keyboard shortcut Control-D, we can bring that down. Once again, the way we did that was by selecting a cell that already had the formula in place that we'd like to copy, and then auto-filling down, using that little green box in the bottom right corner of the cell. Now that we've done that, let's say we'd like to add a couple of columns in order to give ourselves some breathing room. I think I'd like to have maybe let's say 3 columns of space, just to kind of give myself some room. Maybe I'd like to have this field reserved for notes about the week or the month. To insert a column, it's just as easy as it was to insert a row. Simply place your cursor where you'd like there to be a new column, and then here in the Insert tab, in the Home tab, find that Insert dropdown, and select Insert Sheet Columns this time. Now that works for just one column at a time. However, if you'd like multiple columns, let's say I'd like 2 additional columns inserted, highlight 2 columns, in this case column A and column B, right-click, and select Insert. And you'll see now that 2 columns were inserted. Go ahead and try that for yourself and then come back. Fantastic. So we've dropped in a new row, we've inserted a new menu item, we gave ourselves 3 extra columns of space because we'd like to be able to take notes. But you'll notice that when we moved things over a little bit, we kind of lost the organization that we had set up here. For example, our title was initially supposed to be the first cell you saw. And I'm not necessarily in love with how far off to the right average units is now. So let's fix that. Now, there's 2 ways to move and copy data inside of Excel. The first way is relatively straightforward. Click to select the cell that you'd like to move, and then hovering over the border of that selected cell, click and hold, and then drag to the left, or to wherever you'd like to drop it off. And you'll notice that as I'm moving it, I have that green silhouette with no content in it yet. But as soon as I release, boom. Now let's do something different with average units. I'd like to move average units from here to, let's say, here. This time, instead of just highlighting and clicking and dragging, which would be the easiest way, I'm instead going to use my Cut tool, which can be found here inside the Home tab. You can also use the keyboard shortcut Control-X, as you can see in the parentheses of that tooltip that's popped up. Having cut the data, it's now highlighted with that flashing marquee. I'm now going to place my cursor where I'd like the first cell to paste. In this case here, this is the cell where I would like average units to be. Once I've got my cursor where I'd like, I can click the Paste button, or, as the status bar says, I can press Enter. Using either of those methods, I'll go ahead and paste the content. Go ahead and try that for yourself, and then come back. Fantastic. So now you've had a chance to see how easy it is to move, cut, and copy data without having to think about it too hard. Now, I'd like to go ahead and take this opportunity to create my notes section. This is where I'll take any notes on a week-by-week basis to keep an eye on fluctuations, annotate whether or not there are reasons for fluctuations in the business, up or down. So first things first, I'm going to go ahead and just type out notes here. And what I'd like to do is just on a day-by-day basis annotate what's going on throughout the week. So I'm going to start with Sunday here. Now I know what comes after Sunday, and hopefully all of you do too. So I don't necessarily want to have to go through this whole process of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I already know what comes after all of those days. Well, so does Excel. As it turns out, just in the same way that we're able to copy formulas like we did earlier, we're actually able to copy certain values inside of Excel just as easily. So I'm going to take my cursor over here, and I'm going to highlight Sunday. Now, with my active cell on Sunday, you'll notice that we've got this drop-down arrow, just like we did in every other instance. This little box in the bottom right corner, the autofill handle, I'm going to take my cursor and hover over it. Once again, make sure that your fat white cross becomes a thin black cross. Once I've got that thin black cross, I'm going to go ahead and click and hold, and I'm going to drag and watch what happens. Look at the little tooltip on the right. It says Monday. I drop down again, Tuesday. It's actually autofilling the days of the week. Excel does know, just like you and I, that Sunday comes before Monday, comes before Tuesday, and so on, all the way through Saturday. So I've taken it down to row 10, and I'm going to release, and look at that. So we can use autofill not only to continue the pattern of formulas that we're using, but we can also use it to continue on annotating common knowledge fields. Well, what else can we autofill? How about something as simple as the date? Today's date I've currently got 2015. And of course, I know full well that after November 25th, we've got the 26th, the 27th, and so on. But I really don't want to have to go through this whole process of typing. Well, once again, we've got autofill to the rescue. So I'm going to highlight the little cursor, and once I've got my fat white cross and I take it and turn it into that thin black cross, I'm going to click and hold, and I'm going to drag down, and boom, look at that. The tooltip on the right hand side. 11/26, 27, 28, 29, 30. Now this is where you really have to ask yourself, one, is there a 31st day? And if there's not, does Excel know that? Boom. Look at that. I'm going to go ahead and release. Excel actually knew that there isn't a 31st day in November, and so it jumped straight to December 1st. Autofill can really save you a lot of time with just these little micro decisions, these little micro checks to see whether or not you're putting in the right information. Or if it's such common knowledge that it's beyond mundane, autofill can alleviate the whole process and tedium of having to do something that simple. Go ahead and take this opportunity to try this out for yourself. Go ahead and type a familiar common value, like Sunday, or better yet, maybe it's abbreviated value of sun, and autofill down and watch what happens. You can also use the months of the year, like January, or their abbreviation of Jan.